So here's the thing. You might not know it by looking at the videos on my channel, but there are things I like other than Teen Wolf. Hard to believe, I know. One of these things, to put it lightly, is K-pop, and more specifically, 17. Because we are currently entering our military era with 17, I've been going back recently and revisiting some of my favorite 17 content. Like many people, my interest in 17 does not start and end with their music. With 13 members, you're bound to find at least one member whose personality meshes with your interests, and in quite literally every single piece of content, there is going to be something interesting to any kind of viewer. There's the music and the music videos, of course, but there's also the content they make with Na PD, like Nana Tour and Nana B&B. There's Going 17, there's the concert movies, there's the artist-made merch, there's the behind-the-scenes vlog-style content, there's mini teen and petite teen, and so on. And that's just counting the official company-endorsed content, so of course there's also members' personal social medias, their brand partnerships, and you see how this kind of thing just sucks you in? This is all just one group. If you're a fan of multiple K-pop groups, then you will literally never be lacking for content to engage with. But since starting this channel, I've started looking at the content I'm consuming with a bit of a more critical eye. And I've made some observations about 17 and the relationship that the members have with fan service. This is not unique to 17, rather a feature of the K-pop culture as a whole, and on a larger scope to fandom in general, but we'll use 17 as our case study for this example. Part 1. What is fan service? I'm not going to do what I usually do and break down every single fan service moment that 17 has ever had, since we'd be here literally all day, but I do think I need to set up a base understanding before we dive any deeper. First of all, what do I mean when I say fan service? In general, fan service refers to when a celebrity or their management go above and beyond to cater to fan expectations. This is a very simplified understanding, but it works for our discussion here. For K-pop idols, the role includes a handful of things. Obviously, you make music, and that includes the song itself, appearing in the music video, performing the choreo, and the associated concerts. Really, that is the only role that an idol has. Nowadays, many idols are also contractually obligated to appear in their group's variety content, or in some cases, contracted to do a certain number of live appearances, and this is also understood to be part of the idol's responsibility as an employee of their company. If we take a step back and look at this objectively, there isn't all that much difference between the responsibilities of a K-pop idol and that of a musical artist from any other country. But K-pop artists tend to be a little more distinct because they work under a specific music company that oversees pretty much every aspect of their life. They typically have personal managers associated with their company, and from the minute they start their training, they are managed daily for the rest of their career. This is partly why groups like Katseye, I think, are typically lumped in with the K-pop group, even though they market themselves as a global group and don't cater specifically to Korean audiences. They follow a very similar management and marketing style that is typical in Korea and are owned by a Korean idol management company, so there are distinctions between how they're managed and presented compared to, say, Sabrina Carpenter or artists like Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande, who, while technically now under the same company umbrella as Katseye, are marketed and managed completely differently. Part of this, I think, is because the group dynamic of K-pop groups allows for wider marketing, but that's a topic for another day. Strictly speaking, anything on top of these base responsibility is considered fan service. Idols are not required to do the cutesy aegyo or ending fairies that are common and extremely popular with fans. They're not required to flirt with fans at fan events, and they are not required to play up skinship relationships between their members. That's the big one for this discussion. While fan service refers to a pretty wide net of actions, in this video, when I am referring to fan service, I am generally referring to skinship, which is when the idols play up physical interactions in order to suggest possible romantic relationships in order to appease shippers. Skinship is very similar in purpose to fan service, which is ultimately to cater and appease fans, but while fan service tends to appeal to the fan base as a whole, skinship generally only appeals to the smaller subsect of fans because its target audience are just the shippers. Skinship gets into a bit of a gray area because of what fans always deem cultural differences. Of course, groups like 17 are Korean and not raised or managed in the same culture as English-speaking music artists. You'll often see comments from fans responding to shippers that say, "It's not gay if they're touching so much," or "You don't understand, they're only cuddling because touching and being close to other men is common in Korea," and other similar sentiments. I'm not saying this isn't necessarily true. I have personal experience working with various age groups in Korea, and I've seen the difference firsthand, But I think it's a little disingenuous to write off these moments as just part of a typical day, nothing to see here. I also think it's a little disingenuous to look at those moments as factual evidence that your two favorite idols are gay for each other and that they're hiding a secret relationship. Coming back to fan service, it's important to look at these moments and realize they are deliberately played up by the members and the management teams as part of the fan service. The fans of idol groups want and expect skinship, so the idols participate in fan service by delivering it to them. Part 2. What is queerbaiting? Let me paint you a picture. And since I've established myself as unable to separate my thoughts from it, we'll use Teen Wolf as the paint. In this picture, you are a fan of Teen Wolf. The first season of the show has just come out and you have no prior knowledge of the show or its fandom. You're watching the show and you see the main 6 characters. You like Scott, but he's with Allison, and you think Jackson is pretty, but he's also with Lydia. Then, you see Styles. Like many fans before you, you find yourself drawn to Styles. He's funny, he's cute, he's a little bit androgynous, so whatever gender you see yourself as, you can identify with the 147 pounds of skin and fragile bones. He's the human, and you're a human, so it's easy to put yourself in his place and imagine yourself inside the story. Then there's Derek. From the beginning, you like Derek too. Like Scott and Jackson, and also everyone else on the show, Derek is extremely good looking, and the show really wants you to make Derek an object of your desires. The camera speaks for itself. Derek is also unattached to any love interest, so he's prime for you to picture as your hot and angsty teenage werewolf love interest. Then, episode 4 of season 1 rolls around and Styles and Derek have prolonged screen time together. Immediately, the on-screen chemistry is palpable. These two actors work amazingly together, and the characters have a sort of love-hate relationship with lots of moments when they touch or get very close to one another. This is perfect. You already see yourself in Styles' shoes, and you already lust after Derek, so why not picture Styles as the one who's lusting after Derek? Better yet, Derek lusts after him too. Lydia is an obstacle for Styles' affections, but she's already chained to Jackson for the first few seasons, and it's not like Derek has anyone that he's in bed with. Of the main cast, they're the only ones unattached, and it works out all nice and neat for you. Hopefully I've done a good enough job setting up one of the ways that a fan of Teen Wolf may stumble head over ass into the Sterek fandom. In the first season of the show, the relationship between Styles and Derek is rocky at best, but as the Sterek fandom grows, so does the response to Teen Wolf. The show blows up, in large part to the Sterek fandom, and they are confirmed to start production on a second season. A second season that will include a handful of moments between Styles and Derek that cater to the Sterek fans who watch the show. Fan service, if you will. Even the behind-the-scenes content is starting to show Sterek stuff, and it looks like that ship that people love is the forefront of the show's mind. Then the third season comes along and, wait, is that a new female love interest for Derek? And one for Styles too? Oh no. Well, I guess it might make narrative sense for the two of them not to fall for each other right off the bat. Then the second half of season 3 comes along and both Styles and Derek get new female love interests. Then season 4 comes along and before you know it, Derek has left the show and all we've had in the meantime were a handful more homoerotic moments and a few frustratingly unclear fan service moments. At this point in the show's lifespan, whatever may have been teased about Styles and Derek is all but gone. The showrunners and writers don't seem to be interested in making it official and the characters literally are not seen together for years. But then, a spark of hope. In season 6, which has already been confirmed to be the final season of the show, and Styles and Derek have a few more scenes together. Their on-screen chemistry is electric as usual, and we get some hints at a bigger story behind the scenes than we actually see. And then, the show just kind of ends. No kiss, no hug, no Sterek. If you've been playing around in online fandom spaces, especially ones for YA teen dramas or really any of the fandoms I'm showing on the screen right now, then you're probably familiar with the idea of queerbaiting. You might be able to connect the dots on where I'm going with this, but bear with me. Queerbaiting, as mentioned in my Sterek video, is essentially just implying through marketing or content that two characters will engage in a queer relationship and then not following through with it. It's there in Destiel and Supernatural, it's there in Buddie and 911, and it's there in Sterek. Queerbaiting is especially frustrating as an audience because it takes that aspect from fan service, which is to cater to the fans, but it doesn't fully deliver on those expectations. Sterek fans are not happy with the way that the relationship between the characters is dangled over their head like a carrot, just as means for the show to get an audience, without ever delivering the fan content that they want. On one hand, I'm a huge hater when it comes to the way that fandom culture nowadays seems to feel entitled to their demands. I think it's completely unreasonable to expect showrunners and writers to change their ideas for a particular show just because the fans think it would be nice to see their faves together. Typically, shows that try to modify their ideas due to fan response do not turn out so well in the end. But on the other hand, when a show, whether it be the showrunner or the writers or the marketing team, deliberately capitalize on the interest from fans just to get more viewers or to win awards, then they cross a major line. As you might expect, this happened to Teen Wolf. During the second season, in what I'd argue is the height of Sterek popularity, there was a video released on the Teen Wolf Tumblr where the actors cuddled together on a boat and urged fans to vote for Teen Wolf at the upcoming Teen Choice Awards. The literal caption of this video implies that if they don't win, then the ship might as well be dead in the water. Well, what do you know it? The show did win their award. And then when the season ended and the next season started up with shiny new female love interests for both characters, fans were understandably pissed. The sentiment seemed to be, we gave you what you wanted, now where is what we want? In the case of Teen Wolf, this ultimately ended up in a lose-lose situation for both the show and the fans. The showrunners and writers ultimately did not deliver on any substantial Sterek storyline, and as a result, the fans got very, very angry. I would say too angry, and it resulted in some very bad actors outright attacking and harassing the cast and crew of the show. So as a result, the creators dug their heels in further and really doubled down on the lack of Sterek content, and the cycle continued. Eventually, the outright hate died down a little because the most vocal and passionate fans left the fandom due to the treatment, and the show and movie decided it would be okay to throw them a bone every now and then. And for a show to push itself in the direction where it alienated some of its self-proclaimed strongest fans is not a good thing. Teen Wolf is ultimately tainted in some ways by this whole debacle. While I still argue that the show is good actually, even through its final season and parts of the movie, you can't look at this in retrospect and think it turned out for the best, for the show or for the fan. I wanted to breach this topic with Teen Wolf to start because it helps to deliver a perfect understanding of what I mean when I say that queerbaiting can be harmful. It affected the fans, it affected the cast, and it quite literally affected the show to an extent that may never have been seen before. If you're a Supernatural fan, you might have heard that last sentence and said, whoa, 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 Destiel was a ship before Sterek ever was, and it had queerbaiting too. And yes, that is true. Destiel, like Sterek after it, was essentially a frustrating marketing ploy to get fans to continue watching the series. Tease and never deliver. Even if you consider that moment in the end of the series where Castiel does confess his love for Dean, the ship is ultimately destroyed by what fans call super hell, never to be discussed again. Both Teen Wolf and Supernatural end in a place that fans look at as kind of disrespectful to their interest because they keep teasing and promising, and then end with the ships being completely unviable because the characters die a brutal death. There is one more show I want to bring up in this queerbaiting discussion because I think it is an interesting continuation of a lot of the problems we've seen so far, and that is Buck and Eddie in the show 911. This ship has similar issues to ones like Sterek and Destiel, since it seems to constantly tease the relationship between these two characters, and fans continuously demand for this couple to become canon, but it's been season after season and still nothing. Well, I wouldn't say nothing entirely. The difference between Sterek and Buddie is that 911 is still airing, so we can't be completely certain where they're going with the series or the plot lines for the characters. When this ship first took off, it seemed to be following the exact queerbaity formula that Sterek used. In 911, Buck and Eddie start off sort of antagonistic towards each other, but very quickly the two essentially become best friends. Throughout the series, Buck even ends up becoming a sort of second father to Eddie's son, and in one of the more recent seasons, Buck even has a queer awakening and realizes he's bisexual. For fans, moments like this seem to be promising. There's no way they're going to be setting up this stuff and then won't set them up as a couple, and right now, who knows? I wouldn't use a character's understanding their sexuality as confirmation of a future queer ship, since this did sort of also happen to Styles and Teen Wolf, and we know where that ended up. But I'd like to have hope that this ship is not destined to end up in super hell along with Destiel and Sterek. Part 3. Queerbaiting in real life. When we look back at ships like Sterek and Destiel, we can say without a doubt that these are instances of queerbaiting. I'm not as well versed in 911 content as I am with Teen Wolf, so I'm not sure if there have been official interviews with showrunners or writers that confirm future plans, but for where the ship is right now, it seems to fall pretty squarely in the queerbaiting category as well. But we can't be certain. That leads me to our next part of this discussion pretty well, I think. How exactly does queerbaiting relate to real people or events that haven't happened yet? Well, If you're like me and you used to pull up Wikipedia pages listing all the gay characters in TV history in order to find something with gay representation to watch, then you may ultimately be familiar with lots of gay and queer media content. One of the most notable LGBT shows in the last few years, in my opinion, is the Netflix series Heartstopper. Heartstopper follows a handful of queer characters and is what I would consider a pretty decent show. One of the lead couples, arguably the lead couple, is Nick and Charlie, played by Kit Connor and Joe Locke respectively. Part of the show's appeal to its viewers is that pretty much all of the characters are LGBT in some capacity, and one of the big storylines for the show is the understanding of sexuality. See, Charlie is already out as gay in the first episode, but Nick is not, and he learns throughout the first season that he's attracted to men. Like Styles and Buck before him, Nick concludes that he is bisexual. This is handled, I think, very well in the series, and they do an excellent job not minimalizing his bisexuality, which we love. Part of the build-up to the release of Heartstopper's first season was the reveal that during casting, the showrunners and the author of the original book wanted to cast actors that reflect the characters they play in the series. For example, the character Charlie, who is gay, is played by Joe Locke, who is out as gay in real life. Similarly, the character Elle, who is a trans woman, is played by Yasmin Finney, who is also a trans woman. Fans of the graphic novel were quick to point out that Kit Connor, who at this point was not out as anything, had been cast as Nick. Part of society's frustrating understanding of sexuality is that anyone who is not out as a member of the LGBT community must be straight. So of course, people kind of just assumed that Kit Connor was a straight man. And since the topic of straight people taking away roles from LGBT actors had been a big topic, this ultimately ended up with people attacking Kit Connor for taking the role of Nick, a bisexual character, away from someone who has lived experience for the role. God, I wish people would just stop jumping into these things by attacking people. People were very quick to point at Kit Connor and say that he himself was queerbaiting since he'd not confirmed any part of his sexuality and was profiting off of all this. Since queerbaiting is the act of implying queerness for gain without confirming anything, people were very harsh in their judgment of Kit Connor for what they saw as a nasty thing to do. I mean, this sort of thing ruined TV shows and sent characters to super hell. What ended up happening is that Kit Connor made statements confirming that he was also bisexual actually, and that he wasn't prepared to come out publicly. So in the end, angry fans basically just ended up outing someone before they were ready because they thought he was queerbaiting. Really not a good look. A similar thing happened to the author Becky Albertalli actually. She is probably best known as the author of the book Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, which is what the movie Love, Simon is based on. Around the time the movie was released, people attacked her for being a straight woman who wrote and profited off of gay storylines. A form of queerbaiting, if you will. In 2020, she also publicly came out as bisexual and said that the carelessness in these discussions caused her real harm. This does not end with just Kit Connor and Becky Albertalli. Turns out, people pointing fingers and attacking multiple different queer people because they're not out, and assuming they were queerbaiting in order to progress their careers, it just doesn't turn out well. Something I hope has become clear in these examples is that assuming a real person's sexuality is harmful and dangerous. In the general topic of queerbaiting, I hope it's also become clear that real-life people cannot queerbait. It's just not something that can happen. Because you can't assume the sexuality of a real-life person. These things are personal and usually completely irrelevant to their ability to do their job. Compare this to a fictional character, whose sexuality generally has some sort of storyline or plot relevance, especially in the case of characters like Nick, who are discovering their sexuality, or in cases when the relationship is the storyline. Fictional characters being used for queerbaiting is scummy on behalf of the creators and the marketing. Real-life people cannot do this. They can build up and imply their sexuality as much as they want, and it might feel like queerbaiting, but since they're real and you can't assume their sexuality, you can't just label it queerbaiting, especially if this is going to be a reason for you to bash them on the internet. And Kit Connor and Becky Albertalli are clear examples of this. You just don't know. To an extent, we can maybe draw similar conclusions with Buddie. If it turns out they do put these characters together, then all this talk about them queerbaiting will be completely irrelevant. It's not baiting if it happens, so it'll all just be excruciating build-up to the ship itself. Part 4. Idol image. But what does any of this have to do with 17? As I just mentioned, it's not possible for real people to queerbait, so you'd think that would be all. K-pop fan service can't be queerbaiting because they're real people. End of discussion, right? I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. What we as an audience see when we watch a K-pop music video or attend a concert or watch variety content is not, essentially, a real person. These are carefully crafted idol images that are based in part on a real person's personality and thoughts and interests, but also with decades of marketing and societal expectations on them. It is very common in K-pop to hear members described as specific roles within their group. Using 17 as our example here, it's nice and easy to sort them into some categories because they do it themselves. They have a hip-hop unit, a vocal unit, and a performance unit. Typically, you would see these designated as rapper, vocalist, and dancer, respectively, so we will be able to label members like S-Coups as main rapper, DK as a main vocalist, and Hoshi as a main dancer. Some groups will also designate sub-rapper or sub-vocalist or sub-dancer, but 17's company Pledis only really makes distinction for the vocal unit, where it labels DK and Seungwan as main vocalists and Jonghan, Joshua, and Woozi as lead vocalists. This distinction here is very minor, but ultimately it just identifies DK and Seungwan as the ones with the largest vocal range and the tendency to carry songs. These terms are generally very loose in 17's, since pretty much every member is very skilled with choreography, and more or less all of them are talented vocalists and or rappers. 17 kind of breaks these distinctions more than most groups, but for the purpose of this visualization, we'll use these labels for the members. Where it can start to get confusing is when we add in some other labels that are commonly used within the K-pop industry, such as visual or center or leader. Well, leader is the easiest since there's generally only one and they tend to be the oldest, and within 17 that's S-Coups. Each of these subunits also has its own leader, with S-Coups once again being the leader of the hip-hop unit, Hoshi as the leader of the performance unit, and Woozi as the leader of the vocal unit. Some of the other subunits also have leaders, like I believe that DK is recognized officially as the leader of Busoksun, which is one of their subunits that promotes as its own group. There's also Magne, which is easy because it just refers to the youngest member, which in this case is Dino. Where it starts to get a little fuzzy is the distinction between visual and center. The center is usually the member that is in the middle during performances or music videos. They tend to get the most attention and draw in a lot of public perception of the group. 17 doesn't officially have a center, though because they tend to shuffle around quite a bit, but you might notice when watching the music videos and performances that it tends to lean a bit more heavily into Hoshi and Wonu as centers. Now, while they are both incredibly attractive, neither Hoshi nor Wonu are officially designated as visuals by the company. A visual, essentially, are members that are good looking and often also act as sort of a face of the group publicly. You might notice that the whole being the face to the public thing is also something that a center does, so this is where the lines usually get crossed. For 17, the official visuals are Jonghan, Joshua, Mingyu, and Vernon, though you could probably make an argument for most members that they belong here. I also believe in the earlier days of the group that June was recognized as a visual, but as of Happy Birthday, there are only the 4 mentioned. Why does any of this matter? Well, having these clear labels and distinctions between the members is essentially just marketing mumbo-jumbo. Like I said, with 17, pretty much all of the members are talented dancers, and they're obviously all ridiculously attractive, so why does it matter who is labeled what? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. The world will continue to turn and they will probably keep making music. But we look at it from a marketing perspective, this is sort of genius. There's probably a reason we don't see members like Dino or Hoshi on shows like The Masked Singer, while we did see Seungwan. Dino and Hoshi are talented singers, sure, but Seungwan is the one who's designated as a main vocalist, and it gives him the opportunity to showcase his vocal talent. Similarly, when they make variety appearances or do interviews without the entire group, it's interesting to look at which members get chosen to do which content. Most recently, I was watching the BuzzFeed video with 17 where they read thirst tweets. In this video, we have Mingyu, Seungwan, V8, and Vernon. Why? Why not bring someone really high energy like DK or Hoshi? Why not bring S-Coups, who we all know has some of the thirstiest comments out there? I think part of this boils down to the language diversity in 17, namely that Vernon speaks English, V8 speaks Chinese, and both Mingyu and Seungwan have shown an interest in participating in English content to expand their vocabulary, but that isn't super relevant to the discussion here. We know from the discussion earlier that none of these 4 members are officially designated as a leader, so why not include one? We also know that 2 of these 4 are officially designated as visuals, and Seungwan also gets a special mention here for being one of the most recognizable members to the Korean public. This has a lot to do with his effort to get 17 noticed by appearing on literally any variety show that he could back when they had first debuted. I think the member selection in this video is the perfect blend of good content for what they were trying to do, English language prowess, and general commercial viability. The distinctions between these members serve as part of the way the members are marketed to help identify their idol image. Mingyu is a great example here because fans know him to be particularly clumsy and have a sort of golden retriever energy, but when it comes to the official marketing, he's mostly only ever seen as this incredibly sexy and one of the main visuals. His idol image has practically nothing to do with the personality traits that he has, at least at first. When the fans really latched onto Mingyu's clumsiness as an endearing trait, it started to appear more and more in variety content that they were putting out. There are practically hundreds of compilations of Mingyu dropping things, or Mingyu tripping, or Mingyu walking into tree branches, but these are not just quirky things they've just happened to include. They're deliberate marketing moments that the management companies are choosing to include in the content. It's just as easy to edit out the moment where Mingyu walks into this tree branch, but leaving it in allows for a fan service moment where they deliver on the kind of content the fans want to see. They already know Mingyu is a visual because of the music videos, but they want to see more, and this gives it to them. Rather than showing his entire true personality, he can rely on specific marketable traits to provide fan service to the audience, and the skin shipping thing can be seen as a kind of queerbaiting because the fans want and expect their ship to be cuddly and close, so the idols and the management team cater to this expectation. Wonu is another great example of this, actually. As an idol, Wanu's image is very much the archetype of icy and serious. His raps are typically quite serious and almost aggressive, and in most of the photo shoots and inclusions, he's not smiling or looking particularly cutesy. However, in variety content, we sometimes get a glimpse into Wanu's more adorable side, and in the last year or two especially, we can see a real shift in the way that Wanu's idol image has been presented. I'd like to say it started with Nana Tour, but it was a little before that. In Nana Tour, Wanu comes across almost more as a lovable dork rather than the iciest person you've ever seen, and it renewed a whole audience into loving him and his versatility. On the Happy Birthday album, where all the members have solo songs, Wanu almost completely breaks away from his icy persona and delivers an upbeat song where he doesn't rap at all. Woozi even says in the behind-the-scenes videos that the members have known about Wanu's cute side for years, and he's glad they finally get a chance to show it to the fans. Wanu's idol image has been so carefully curated as this dark and icy rapper that's just releasing a song where he sings and smiles is practically a different person. I could go on, and maybe I will, but the real takeaway here is that these idol images are carefully crafted in part by the idol and by the management companies to deliver a sort of character or persona of the idol and not necessarily their true identity. It might be part of it, but it's highly edited and is more for brand identity and marketing than it is for any part of the idol's actual life. Part 5. Skin shipping. This comes to a peak when we look at the culture of shipping in K-pop fandom. Whether it is the result of deliberate fan service through acts like skinship, or more naturally from fans noticing bonds between members, it is incredibly common to find shippers as core part of the K-pop fandom. This is very typical for pretty much any fandom, but it is especially prominent in K-pop groups, and I would argue is even more common in the fandoms for boy groups rather than in girl group fandoms or cross-group fandoms. You can probably look at any single K-pop group and ship every single member with any other member in the group. With groups that have very few members, this is absolutely true, but it's true in 17 as well, and they have 13. Seeing as all the members of 17 are men, all of these ships in 17 fandoms are queer ships. There are a handful of cross-group fics that pair the members up with women, Twice and Blackpink especially, but we're talking about queerbaiting here, so we'll just look at the queer ships within the group. Like I said, you can probably ship any two members together, but there are a handful of ships that get more attention than others. I'll keep this brief, so if you happen to be a shipper and you don't hear me mention your favorite one, then I'm sorry. Maybe leave a comment and I can talk about them more in depth in their own video. One of the biggest is Jongchul, which is S.Coups and Jonghan. There's also Howoo, which is Hoshi Woozi, Minwon, which is Mingyu Wonu, Wonhui, which is Wonu and Jun, Verkwan, which is Vernon and Seungwon, and so on. We would be here all day if I mentioned every ship, so these 5 are the focus on what we'll be looking at right now. I don't personally ship any members of 17, and I've only really interacted with 17 shipping content on a very basic level, since I tend to try to avoid shipping real people, but we'll dig into that more in a moment. S.Coups and Jonghan, I think, mostly come from the fact that when you look at Jonghan, he tends to come across quite feminine. S.Coups is bulkier and more masculine, so the two together have a very prototypical dynamic that is attractive to fans. If it's your kind of thing, I imagine it's quite easy for the audience, which is predominantly female, to picture themselves in Jonghan's shoes. But it's interesting because Jonghan is actually more popular than S.Coups on most Korean and Japanese fan surveys. If you've ever tried to buy a Jonghan photo card, you would know he's easily the most popular member of the group in quite a few countries, and they take their standing very seriously. Jonghan also has a sort of mischievous persona where he's identified with the angel emoji but tends to behave a little more devilish. And since he and S-Coops are the oldest two members, they kind of take on a parenting role to some younger members. It's very mom and dad core, and the rest of the group are the kids. I've been to a handful of 17 concerts, and there are some very vocal S-Coops and Jonghan stans, but I haven't personally seen any shipping banners of these two at the concerts I attended in Korea. I did, however, see some freebies when I attended a concert here in Canada, so that leaves me to believe that this ship is a little more popular with 17 fans who are not from Korea or China. This is mostly speculation since the fandom is very huge, but from what I've personally experienced, it seems to be more or less true. Hoshi and Woozi are a big one, and they sort of fall into the grumpy sunshine trope more than any of the other ships here. Hoshi is an unparalleled ball of energy, and Woozi has a sort of similar icy exterior to what we discussed with Wonu earlier, so it makes sense. They're also both leaders of their respective units, both born in 96, so they don't need to use honorifics, and in general, they just seem to be close. I know this ship is popular worldwide, and it's not hard to see why. They also recently had their own comeback as a duo subunit, and I hear their concerts did very well all across Korea. Vernon and Seungkwan operate in a strange sort of realm because I don't know if I can identify a specific trope that they work under. It's kind of grumpy sunshine since Seungkwan is usually cheerier and Vernon tends to have a sort of blank face on the outside, but I think I lean more toward it being one of those kinds of ships where an extrovert adopts an introvert. Seungkwan is very outgoing and Vernon enjoys time alone, so it makes sense. Like Hoshi and Woozi, they are also both born in the same year, so no honorifics needed. When you watch their green room content, which is pretty cursed, they really enjoy each other's company, and you get the sense in some of their later content that Seungkwan knows Vernon on a level that the other members don't reach. Of the ships we're discussing today, I think this might be the second most popular, at least in fan content and compilations that I've seen. Wonu and June is a strange one since I don't really see it as often anymore, but I know it's huge from personal experience. When I attended my various concerts in Korea, I ran into quite a few Chinese fans who paid exorbitant scalper prices in order to get floor seats, and well over 80% of them had Wanhui banners or freebies and seemed solely interested in the two of them. I imagine this ship is hugely popular with the Chinese fan base, but it might be eclipsed worldwide by Wanu's other big ship, which we'll get to in a second. I think it might also be partly because of the fandom's tendency to forget about June, and the company's tendency to underpromote or underutilize June in general, and Wonu is such a hugely popular member both in Korea and Japan, as well as worldwide, that they don't really need to rely on the ship to keep the two in the public eye. Their ship tends to focus on how the two of them are both generally represented with cats, and a sort of grumpy sunshine dynamic, with June being a little more chaotic and energetic, while Wonu is relaxed. Think Orange Cat and Black Cat. Arguably the biggest ship for 17 though is Mingyu and Wonu. Of about 60,000 fan works on Archive of Our Own, almost 9,000 are Minwon, which does beat out all the other ships mentioned here, though not by too much, as Jungcheol is pretty close behind. Unlike all of the other ships I've mentioned so far, these two are not born in the same year, with Wonu born in 96 and Mingyu in 97. So there's a pretty common tendency to overuse the Hyung relationship between the two in fanworks. It's not an age gap like Sterek, but it does get some attention. Like I mentioned earlier, Mingyu also tends to have a kind of dog energy, and Wonu is usually associated with cats, so it's very much cat and dog trope where Wonu is quiet and relaxed, while Mingyu is excitable and more outgoing. There's also the fact that the two of them live together, which is not uncommon for K-pop idols in the same group, even 17, who has a handful of other members who also share living accommodations, but Mingyu and Wonu living together is often used as some sort of evidence that the two are secretly together. Uri jib, which translates to our home, is a very common phrase among Minwon shippers, and people really like the idea that Mingyu goes out and parties with the rest of the 97 line at night, and then returns to Wonu to be all domestic once the sun rises. Their contrast also makes them uniquely popular for Omegaverse fanfiction, with the more outgoing and outwardly sexy Mingyu as an alpha and quiet introverted Wonu as an omega, as well as some supernatural fanfictions where Wonu is a vampire and Mingyu is a werewolf. As you might imagine, it's very easy to take the cat and dog dynamic they have and project it onto pretty much any kind of trope or fandom, like enemies to lovers, childhood friends, strained work colleagues, and so on. Of these ships, Minwon is the only one I think I would ever maybe find myself interested in, since a lot of these tropes overlap with the fandoms of fictional characters that I do like. But what does any of this have to do with queerbaiting? Part 6. Queerbaiting and fan service. Well, believe it or not, many of these ships are not just fan creations that are completely unknown to the idols and their management companies. It would be pretty hard since, as I mentioned, fans tend to hold up banners and signs that advertise these ships directly in front of the idols themselves. At some point, the ships become popular enough that the idols or their management take notice, and lo and behold, these ships are being used for marketing. They're not edited out of content. Skinship is encouraged, and they tease and bait the audience in a very similar fashion to shows like Teen Wolf did with Sterek. They know it's popular, but they're going to use it to get attention. And remember, real people can't queerbait. So what do we call this? It's not really queerbaiting since we have no real confirmation that one or both of these members are not in some way interested in men, but it still kind of stings when the management companies dangle them in front of us in order to sell albums and increase streaming numbers. I think that K-pop idols inhabit a sort of gray area between real people and fictional character. Obviously, these are real people who sometimes use their real names and create real music and show parts of their real personality, but they're so manufactured and monitored by their management companies that the persona the fans see are not a clear picture of a real person. Wonu is not just his icy exterior, nor is he just his adorable and cutesy side either. He's not even just a combination of the various aspects we've seen in 17's content. He's much more multifaceted, and we cannot really say that the K-pop idol Wonu is the exact same as the human person John Wonu. So, since queerbaiting is only possible with fictional characters, and the personas that these K-pop idols can market are essentially fictional, does that mean that fanservice and skin shipping are necessarily queerbaiting? Well, I don't think it's quite that simple, and I don't know if I really have the answer to that either. It's undeniable that there are aspects in K-pop fan service that echo the queerbaiting seen in shows like Teen Wolf. Just like that stupid Sterek video on the boat, these companies have used these shipping moments for their own gain. But at the same time, these are not fictional characters with storylines, but real people who have complex thoughts and feelings. So while the similarities are clear, I don't know if I can really conclude that these kinds of ships are validly queerbaiting. It's similar, but it doesn't fit. I don't think that the term skin shipping goes far enough to describe it though, and since it's not just physical touch, it's a multi-platform marketing effort, and while it's more prominent with some ships than others, it extends through the entire K-pop industry. And with an audience that skews so young in many parts of the world, I worry that stopping to think critically is not going to happen when they are presented such a neatly packaged idea of it. If I had to call it something, it's really just bait, K-baiting, if you will. That is not to say that all K-pop shipping is inherently bad. I think with any ship that involves real people to a degree, that we need to stop and make sure we're being respectful to the people in the first place, which I think most people tend to agree with. If Teen Wolf fans hadn't turned around and attacked the cast and crew about Sterek, then who knows what sort of fanservice-y moments there would have been in the middle season. If it makes the idol uncomfortable and they say so, then it's the fans' responsibility to reel it in. But many idols encourage shipping, and they go through so much negativity that they're able to separate their professional fan service from their real bonds and relationships with the members. As long as it's civil, you do you, I guess. I'd like to say we live in a world where everything I've said today makes total sense and everyone will agree with me, but this is reality, so I know there will be some backlash to this video. I don't want to villainize the behavior in the K-pop industry, but I think we're right at the cusp of it going too far. If we look at the Sterek comparison I made earlier, we're right before that part where they use that stupid boat video to encourage people to vote for them at the award shows. If these companies continue to escalate the way they use this kind of fan service, then I can see it going too far very quickly. And if fans don't reel it in and start to attack their idols and the companies in the same way that Sterek shippers did, then we're going to find ourselves extremely disappointed with the content that is put out in response. I also feel like it's important to mention that there are a handful of out gay idols, and very likely many idols that are some sort of LGBT but not out. It is not the responsibility of the audience to police the identity of the idols, and it's certainly not going to do any good to push the issue with the members. I mean, just look at what happened with Kit Connor and Becky Albertalli. Like I said, K-pop idols are sort of in a gray area between fictional character and real person, so you kind of need to both sides of the issue. You can't point the queerbaiting finger at them, and you can't really absolve them completely. You just have to approach with caution and remain critical. Overall, this is not a clear-cut issue, and it's really not specifically about 17. I hope I made that clear. I wish I could sit in a room with the managers and marketers at these companies and warn them to be careful, but I'd like to think they already know that and have it handled. Lord knows the rest of K-pop is so tightly managed that they seem to be okay with most issues, but there's always little things that slip through the cracks, and I do not want to be around for the blow-up if this ends up being one of them. Moving forward, I think I'll just continue enjoying 17's content and minding my own business. Maybe I'll sit down and organize my photo card collection. Or maybe I'll go watch Nana Tour for the 10th time. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing. If you have any idea for future videos, be sure to drop them in the comments below so I can take a look. I'll definitely have more 17 and Teen Wolf content coming soon, so be sure to check those out if they interest you at all. Until next time.